Usually when we look at the state of the world, we kind of expect to find a certain rhythm to it.
Right, it's sort of predictability.
Yeah, exactly. We rely on this idea that there is a rule book somewhere out there holding it all together.
A very comforting illusion.
It is. But I was looking through our research for today's deep dive, and I found 3 things that just completely shatter that illusion for me.
Yeah, let's hear them.
Right. So we are looking at plummeting rates of dementia in the elderly, a 13-year-old assassin taking out targets in Sweden, and get this, the world's undisputed fertilizer king sitting down for a midnight meeting with Vladimir Putin.
I mean, on the surface, that sounds like the setup to a very complicated, very dark joke.
It really does, but they all point to this singular, undeniable reality. The systems that, you and I have relied on for decades, the old rule books governing everything from our bodies to our borders, they're being rapidly and sometimes violently rewritten.
And if you're out there trying to make sense of the daily news cycle right now, that can feel incredibly disorienting.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we're looking at a landscape of global institutions, medical science, basic economics, and it is all just shifting beneath our feet. The anchors are coming loose.
Which is exactly why we're here. Our mission today is to help you navigate this era of, structural upheaval without feeling totally overwhelmed by the chaos.
Look, it is chaotic.
It is. But when you look at the latest reporting, specifically, we've got this fascinating stack of July 2026 data from The Economist. These strange threads start to weave together.
You really do.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into global geopolitics, some major breakthroughs in human health, the massive shifts in this new AI-driven economy, and some truly profound questions about criminal justice.
And my role today is to really help trace the lines between those data points. Because while the headlines feel frantic and disconnected, if you step back and examine the underlying mechanisms, a very clear pattern emerges.
Right.
You see humanity adapting, sometimes clumsily, sometimes brilliantly, to brand new realities.
So we promise you clear takeaways, deep dives into the actual mechanics of how these things work, and zero dense jargon.
Always a good promise.
Definitely. And to kick things off, I want to start with a story that seems completely out of place.
Okay.
It's about sports. Specifically, it's about Folarin Balogun. He's America's star football player, and he gets a red card at the World Cup for a dangerous challenge.
Right.
And I read this and thought, why on earth are we talking about a soccer match in a geopolitical deep dive?
It's a fair question, but it is the perfect microcosm for how power is currently dismantling established systems.
How so?
Well, let's look at the mechanics of what actually happened. Since roughly 1970, the rule book for a red card in football have been binary and absolute. It is a rigid institution.
Right. You get the card, you're out.
Exactly. You commit a red card offense, you are automatically suspended for the next match. There's no gray area, no negotiation.
It's one of the few universal laws in sports. I mean, everyone accepts it.
But then U.S. President Donald Trump decides he just doesn't like this outcome. So what does he do? He complains directly to the president of FIFA.
Wow.
Yeah. And FIFA, in a move that essentially waves away a half-century of established protocol, they just suspend the ban. They erase it.
Just like that?
Just like that. UEFA, the European governing body, they released a statement saying FIFA crossed a fundamental red line.
Although, I mean, looking at the stats, it didn't really do the U.S. team any favors. They still got thrashed 4-1 by Belgium.
Sure.
But I see your point. The rulebook was clear, but leverage overrode the rulebook.
Exactly. It represents the raw exercise of leverage over institutional norms. And the reason this matters to you and me is that we're seeing this exact same dynamic, this bending of the rules through sheer force of will playing out on the world's most critical geopolitical stages.
The old systems are fracturing.
The old multilateral systems are fracturing, yeah.
So let's follow that thread directly to the NATO summit in Ankara. Because if we're talking about institutions struggling to maintain their rule books, NATO seems to be right at the epicenter right now.
Without a doubt.
I mean, the reporting on the summit is just wild. You have Trump arriving and immediately just throwing the agenda out the window.
The Ankara summit was a masterclass in this new volatile geopolitical reality.
Huh.
Picture the tension in that room.
I can only imagine.
You have the heads of state of the most powerful military alliance in history expecting to follow a highly structured diplomatic script.
Right. The usual handshakes and photo ops.
Exactly. Instead, the American president arrives and immediately begins airing very public grievances. He's furious about European allies not providing enough support for the recent Iran war, and Bizarrely, he brings up his lingering demands over Greenland.
Okay, wait, I have to pause you there. Greenland.
Yes, Greenland.
He's still actively demanding that America should control Danish territory, like in a modern diplomatic setting.
He is. And while it sounds absurd to traditional diplomats, it's actually a deliberate tactic of destabilization.
To keep them guessing.
Right, it keeps the Allies constantly off balance. But the truly dizzying part is the whiplash. Because after this initial barrage of historical grievances, his tone completely shifts.
Really? How fast?
Within hours.
Hmm.
Within hours, he signs a communique reasserting an ironclad commitment to collective defense.
And he didn't just offer words, right? Because I read he granted Ukraine a license to manufacture Patriot surface-to-air interceptor missiles on their own soil.
Which is a massive, tangible shift in military strategy.
Yeah, that's huge.
To understand the gravity of that, we really have to look at the immediate context. Just prior to this summit, Ukraine suffered devastating Russian strikes on Kyiv.
Oh, right.
28 people were killed, and that was following another bombardment that killed 30. The old systems relying on imported piecemeal defense systems, they were failing to stop ballistic missiles.
So they needed to make their own.
Yes. By granting the Patriot license and backing Ukraine's ability to strike deep inside Russia, the old rules of engagement were officially thrown out.
So you have this intense whiplash, grievances about Danish territory 1 minute, and then ironclad defense and advanced missile manufacturing the next.
Right.
But all of this is happening in the shadow of what's going on in the Middle East. I mean, the reporting on the Iran war is incredibly tense.
The escalation there has completely rewired the global energy and security map. We're looking at a situation where Iran launched drone attacks on 3 commercial tankers in the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is a massive choke point for oil.
Exactly. And the response from the U.S. was immediate. New military strikes and the revoking of all waivers covering Iranian oil exports.
And then Iran hit back.
Right. They retaliated with strikes on Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar.
And the internal situation in Iran seems just as volatile. The sources detail the funeral of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He was killed on the first day of the conflict, right?
Yes, he was.
His coffin was carried for 6 days, over 1,600 miles, across 5 different cities.
It was a massive mobilization.
But the detail that really caught my eye is that his son and presumed successor, Mojtaba Khamenei, hasn't been seen since the initial strike.
He essentially vanished.
The entire region feels like it's holding its breath, and you have Trump openly declaring that the ceasefire is officially over.
So, I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a European leader right now.
It sounds like a nightmare.
It is.
Yeah.
You're trying to manage an American president who views diplomacy as a transactional real estate deal while simultaneously dealing with a hot war in the Middle East threatening your energy supply and a hot war in Europe threatening your actual borders.
And the old rulebooks just, they don't cover this.
No, the old UN charters and NATO protocols don't provide a script for this level of simultaneous chaos.
This is where Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, enters the picture. The reporting describes him as playing the role of a lion tamer.
That's a very accurate description.
How does one actually tame a situation like this?
Well, Rutte's approach has a fascinating study in psychological diplomacy. He's the former Dutch prime minister, and he recognizes that appealing to institutional loyalty simply will not work.
Right, he can't just point to the charter.
Exactly. So he employs this highly calculated strategy that mixes extreme flattery with very quiet, factual pushback.
Give me an example of the flattery, because the sources made it sound intense.
It is intense. At a press conference right before the Ankara summit, Rutte stands in front of the world's media, looks directly at the cameras with an entirely straight face, and compares Donald Trump to Dwight Eisenhower.
Wow, that is quite the comparison.
He stated that after 60 years of American presidents trying and failing, it took this specific leader to finally match Eisenhower's powers of persuasion and get NATO members to spend their fair share on defense.
Oh, man.
It's a level of flattery that many traditional diplomats find absolutely humiliating.
I can imagine. A lot of teeth grinding in European capitals over that one. But what is the factual pushback part of the strategy?
Right, so once Rutte has delivered the praise and stroked the ego, he uses the resulting goodwill to gently correct the narrative.
Okay.
When the grievance was raised that Europe didn't help in the Iran war, Rutte politely slid the actual data across the table.
He brought receipts.
He did. He reminded the administration that almost 5,000 American planes flew sorties originating from European bases to support Operation Epic Fury.
Which is a huge contribution.
And he also pointed out that Britain and France were actively deploying naval assets to defend the shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around this dynamic. If international security relies entirely on one Dutch diplomat's ability to massage the ego of a world leader, doesn't that just prove that institutions are fundamentally broken?
It's a very valid concern.
I mean, how long can Europe operate like this?
That is the defining tension inside European capitals right now. There are many diplomats who are quietly livid. They find Rute's approach undignified. But those defending Rute argue that he is buying Europe the single most precious commodity in geopolitics right now, which is time.
Time to do what?
Time to rearm. The fear is that if Europe openly acknowledges the unreliability of the American umbrella and begins aggressively planning for a post-American defense structure, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, I see. By planning for abandonment, you trigger the abandonment.
Precisely. It could provoke the very withdrawal they're trying to prepare for. So Rute smiles, flatters, and buys them another year to build up their own munitions.
It just sounds exhausting. And it perfectly sets up this essay in our sources from Mark Carney and Alexander Stubb, the leaders of Canada and Finland.
Yes, a crucial piece of writing.
They're looking at this exact same fractured landscape and proposing a completely different way forward.
Their perspective is absolutely vital because they represent what we call middle powers.
Right.
Think about it. Finland shares a massive, heavily armed border with an unpredictable Russia. Canada shares the world's longest undefended border with an increasingly unpredictable United States.
That's a unique kind of pressure.
Both leaders acknowledge that the post-1945 world order, the idea of rigid multilateralism where everyone sits at a giant table at the UN, is actively unraveling.
But they don't seem to think the only alternative is just chaos and brute force, right? They use this term, plurilateralism.
Yes, plurilateralism.
What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, multilateralism means everyone is in the same club, bound by the same overarching rules. Plurilateralism, or what they sometimes call variable geometry, is the formation of ad hoc coalitions of the willing.
Just issue by issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Built specifically for the problem at hand.
I was trying to think of an analogy for this, and it feels a bit like realizing your massive corporate board is too slow and bogged down in bureaucracy to get anything done, so you abandon the boardroom entirely and just start a bunch of fast-paced private group chats with the 5 people who actually want to build the product.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Let's build on that group chat idea because it highlights both the strength and the danger of this new system.
Okay, what's the strength?
The strength is agility. You don't have to wait for a consensus of 190 nations. If the G7 needs to secure critical mineral supply chains, they just spin up a specific targeted alliance to do it.
No vetoes from uninvolved countries.
Right. If the European Union needs to cut through red tape to build defense capabilities, they use their new SAFE Pact to bypass the usual roadblocks. You partner deeply where you share values, and you remain purely transactional where you don't.
Okay, but to push that analogy further, what happens when you aren't invited to the group chat?
That's the problem.
Right. If international law is replaced by these ad hoc coalitions, doesn't that just create a world that massively favors the rich and the bold?
That is the darkest implication of plurilateralism. The rigid rules of the post-WWII era, for all their agonizing bureaucracy, were fundamentally designed to give the little guy a voice.
Every country gets a vote at the UN.
Exactly. Every nation had a seat at the General Assembly. In a world of variable geometry, leverage is the only currency. If you are a developing nation and you don't possess critical minerals, strategic geographic positioning, or advanced military technology, you have literally nothing to offer the coalition.
You're just ignored.
You risk being entirely locked out of the global decision-making process. You are forced to constantly prove your worth to the bigger players.
Speaking of having to constantly prove your worth in a fracturing system, I want to pivot from the international stage to the internal dynamics of a very specific, highly centralized state.
Yes.
Because when the old rules stop working globally, the pressure inside individual countries can become explosive. And that brings us to one of the most remarkable pieces of reporting in our entire stack. Enter the oligarch.
Andrei Melnichenko.
Yes.
His story is a masterclass in how elite power structures adapt or fail to adapt when a nation hits a dead end. Melnichenko is Russia's richest man, a titan of fertilizer and coal.
And he's usually very quiet, right?
Historically, yes. But after decades of careful silence, he has stepped out of the shadows to issue a stark warning about his country's trajectory.
The way the sources set the scene for this, I mean, it feels like it's pulled straight from a spy novel.
It really does.
It's May 2025. The Kremlin tower clock has just struck midnight. Melnichenko has been summoned. The building is largely empty, but Vladimir Putin is awake, inviting him to sit down for tea. And sitting right there on Putin's desk is a red folder.
And in the context of Russian power dynamics, a red folder on the president's desk means one thing to an oligarch.
What's that?
It is a compromise dossier from the security services. It's the implicit threat of total destruction. And what makes Melnichenko so fascinating is how he navigates that specific moment.
Right, because he doesn't cower. He just addresses the elephant in the room immediately.
He does. He looks at Putin and says, "Of course I'm afraid 100% like everyone else. Why deny it? I'm not afraid of anything specific, unless there's something in your folder. But if there is, please tell me so at least I know what to fear."
The absolute sheer nerve to say that to a man like Putin.
Unbelievable nerve.
And he doesn't stop there. He delivers this incredibly blunt assessment of the Russian state, telling him, you cannot have one country for making money and another for security. I mean, how is he still alive to tell this story? Why is he allowed to speak like this?
To understand his survival and his mindset, you have to look at his origins. Melnichenko is not a member of the Siloviki.
Can you break that term down for us?
Yes. The Siloviki are the elite members of the Russian security and military apparatus. So, the former KGB, the FSB, the military intelligence.
The hardliners.
Exactly. They're the enforcers who surround Putin and view the world entirely through the lens of force and state security. Melnichenko didn't come up through those ranks. He was a student of quantum physics at Moscow State University.
Okay, this is the part I need you to explain to me. How on earth, as a university student studying quantum physics, end up as a billionaire coal and fertilizer magnate? What's the bridge there?
The bridge is the total collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. When the state disintegrated, most people saw chaos and tragedy.
Right. Breadlines, hyperinflation.
But Melnichenko looked at it through the lens of quantum mechanics. In quantum physics, particles don't have a single fixed state until they are observed. They exist in a superposition of probabilities.
Meaning reality is fluid.
Reality is fluid.
How did he apply that to a collapsing economy?
He realized that trying to predict a single outcome, betting on one political faction or one rigid business model, was a losing game. Instead, you build a system where the probabilities always favor you, regardless of which way the reality collapses.
That's fascinating.
The sources detail his early days running a currency exchange out of his university dorm room during the hyperinflation. He literally set up a simplified lottery game using sticks in the streets of Moscow.
A lottery game, like a carnival barker.
Exactly like that. He calculated the exact mathematical probabilities so that the house, meaning him, always won over the long term, but the players won just frequently enough to keep handing over their rubles. And when the local mafia tried to extort him, he didn't fight them directly. He simply hired off-duty police cadets to guard his stands because mathematically it was cheaper than paying protection money.
It's just cold, calculating agility. And he scaled that up massively, right? While other oligarchs were literally assassinating each other in the streets over aluminum plants, what was he doing?
He was applying his quantum hedging on a global scale. He quietly convinced an American banker at the Republic National Bank of New York to fly up to $300 million in physical cash a day to Moscow, which he stored in a disused nuclear bunker.
That is absurd. $300 million a day.
It sounds absurd, but it protected him. When the Russian financial default hit in 1998 and wiped out the traditional banks, Melnichenko survived because he was heavily hedged in foreign currency.
He didn't lose his shirt.
Exactly. Then, while everyone else was distracted by the fallout, he systematically bought up deeply undervalued, boring assets, coal mines, railway networks, and fertilizer plants. He built Asuic and Eurochem.
And he became incredibly wealthy.
He became the ultimate globalist. He lived in Switzerland, owned a custom Philippe Starck superyacht, and genuinely believed his immense wealth transcended national borders.
Until February 2022.
Precisely. The invasion of Ukraine shattered his worldview. He freely admits he believed the global rules of capital would protect him.
But they didn't.
No. He was sanctioned, his superyacht was seized by Italian authorities, and he was forced to retreat back to Russia.
And when he gets back, he realizes the system isn't just under pressure, it's heading for a cliff.
Right.
He spends time talking to everyone, the technocrats, the nationalists, the remaining liberals, and he maps out 4 possible scenarios for the future of Russia. I was reading through these, and every single one of them is a geopolitical nightmare.
They are stark. Let's look at his first scenario, vassalage to the West. In this outcome, Russia is eventually forced to integrate back into the global order, but it's kept on the extreme periphery, weak and humiliated. Melnichenko warns that this will only spawn violent revanchism.
Meaning, a political movement built entirely on revenge and reclaiming lost territory, like Germany in the 1930s.
Exactly. A festering wound that eventually infects the rest of the world.
Okay, what's scenario 2?
Scenario 2 is Russia becoming a Chinese buffer state. Essentially, the country is hollowed out, serving merely as a gas station and a geographic meat shield for Beijing in its competition with America.
Which would inevitably breed massive internal resentment among Russians. What's the third scenario?
Total state collapse.
Yeah.
The central authority fractures into a brutal civil war led by regional warlords, all vying for control of the natural resources and, most terrifyingly, the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons.
I mean, that is the ultimate doomsday scenario for the entire planet. Which brings us to the fourth scenario, and the one that actually seems the most plausible right now.
A North Korea-style fortress state. And what is chilling is that Melnichenko confirms this is not a hypothetical. It is actively being planned in the bowels of the Kremlin.
They are actually drawing this up.
Yes. It envisions a completely closed society, economically decoupled from the world, sustained entirely by hyper-militarism, brutal domestic repression, and permanent ideological confrontation with the West.
So having mapped out these four catastrophic futures, Melnichenko proposes a fifth way out. He calls it sovereignty. But, when Putin uses the word sovereignty, he means the state can do whatever it wants. What does Melnichenko mean?
He means agency for the elite and the citizenry. He is advocating for a shift away from dictatorial one-man rule. The sources draw a brilliant historical parallel here to the year 1905.
Oh, right. What happened in 1905?
Russia had just fought a disastrous 19-month war against Japan. The economy was buckling, and it became mathematically undeniable that the absolute dictatorial rule of Tsar Nicholas II was unsustainable.
It was breaking the country.
It was leading to ruin. So the industrialists and the technocrats of the era effectively cornered the Tsar and forced him to issue the October Manifesto, which granted basic civil liberties and created a legislative assembly.
They forced him to share power.
They forced a modernization of the power structure to prevent a total collapse. Melnichenko is trying to position himself as the catalyst for a modern-day October Manifesto.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back on this, because we're framing this as a rescue mission for Russia. But look at what he's actually proposing. His solution to a dictatorial regime is an oligarchy.
Right.
He's basically saying, let's replace the one guy at the top with a boardroom of wealthy elites dividing the pie.
That isn't freedom. It sounds like a corporate takeover where the major shareholders realize the erratic CEO is crashing the stock price, so they force a restructuring to protect their dividends. Where is the democracy in this plan?
You are entirely correct to be skeptical. And if you read his words carefully, he never mentions democracy. Not once.
Okay, so it's not about human rights.
No, this is not a human rights crusade. It is a project of pure pragmatism. To a Western listener, replacing an autocrat with a consortium of billionaires and intelligence chiefs sounds deeply corrupt.
It does. But put yourself in Melnichenko's quantum mindset. He isn't looking for a perfect moral outcome. He is looking for the most probable path to survival.
The lesser of the evils.
Exactly. An oligarchy of consensus where power is shared among competing factions is inherently more predictable to the outside world, and it requires less violent coercion at home than a fortress state. He is trying to engineer a fire exit before the building collapses.
It's fascinating because it shows how relying entirely on the old rules of global capital left him exposed. He got blindsided by the fragmentation of geopolitics.
He really did.
Which leads us perfectly into the next major theme in our sources. Because if geopolitics is fracturing, the forces driving our own economies, technology, and finance, they're accelerating at a speed that is starting to break the systems meant to contain them.
We absolutely have to talk about the AI economy.
Yes.
The data points from this July 2026 reporting are staggering, both in their scale and in their contradictions. On one hand, you have the tech boom reaching escape velocity. OpenAI has just rolled out GPT 5.6 following intense government security vetting.
Huge milestone.
You have SK Hynix, the South Korean chipmaker, seeking a massive $28 billion IPO. Samsung is logging record profits, and SpaceX has officially joined the NASDAQ 100.
It's an unprecedented concentration of wealth and computing power. But right next to those numbers, the sources highlight something completely counterintuitive.
What's that?
In the midst of this historic boom, Microsoft announces they're cutting 3,200 jobs at their Xbox division, citing a severe hardware crisis. And even more concerning, the central banks are openly sounding the alarm.
This is where the foundation starts to crack. The institutions tasked with maintaining the stability of the global economy are terrified of the very technology driving its growth.
Why?
Well, the European Central Bank recently demanded that 110 major banks present credible, immediate plans for dealing with the security threats posed by advanced AI models.
And the Bank of England issued a warning that AI is going to radically increase the sophistication of cyber attacks on the fundamental plumbing of the financial system.
It's a huge vulnerability.
I'm struggling to square these two things, though. If central banks are terrified that AI might literally crash the financial infrastructure, why is the market rewarding it with trillions in valuation?
Because AI is the ultimate double-edged sword for capital. It promises to supercharge efficiency and productivity, which drives up stock prices.
Stocks love efficiency.
Right. But to achieve that efficiency, it threatens to displace massive amounts of human labor, or at the very least, severely suppress wages.
Which creates a massive societal problem. If AI makes the companies endlessly rich, but the workers obsolete, how do you prevent the entire system from collapsing under the weight of political instability?
This exact fear is driving one of the most radical policy experiments in modern history, detailed in the sources as the Trump accounts.
This blew my mind when I read it. Break down the mechanics of what this actually is.
Starting in July 2026, the policy dictates that every American baby born between 2025 and 2028 will receive an account with $1,000 invested directly into U.S. stocks.
Just automatically.
Automatically. It is essentially a massive, government-mandated trust fund program.
And who's paying for this?
It is heavily deficit-financed by taxpayers. But what's unique is that billionaires and massive corporations are actively contributing capital to it.
Like, voluntarily.
Yes. The sources note that the Dell Foundation alone pledged $6.3 billion to the initiative. Already, 6 million of these accounts have been opened.
I can see why it would be popular with voters, but why are billionaires eagerly handing over billions of dollars to fund stock accounts for random babies? What's the underlying motive here?
Survival. The Economist sources give this policy a surprising amount of credit because it represents a desperate pivot from universal basic income to universal basic equity.
Universal basic equity, meaning instead of just handing people cash to buy groceries, you give them a stake in the means of production.
Precisely. The elite are terrified of a phenomenon the sources call Gen Z socialism.
Gen Z socialism, okay.
They are tracking a rising political desire among younger generations for strict, state-mandated price controls on housing and groceries, and a general, deep-seated disillusionment with free market capitalism.
Which makes sense. I mean, if you feel like the system is rigged to only benefit the owners of AI, why would you support the system?
Exactly. So the architects of the Trump accounts realize that if AI is going to concentrate wealth entirely in the hands of those who hold capital, the only way to prevent a societal revolt is to aggressively force everyone to become a capitalist.
You make them shareholders.
You tie the average citizen's financial future directly to the success of these frontier technologies. It's a defensive mechanism to teach financial literacy and align the working class with the stock market.
But think about the paradox here. We are literally handing out stock portfolios to infants to prepare them for an automated future, using the exact same financial markets that the Bank of England just warned might be fundamentally compromised by that same AI.
It's circular logic.
We're using the tools of the old economy to try and patch the holes of the new economy.
It is a precarious tightrope walk. And when you look at how poorly old policy tools handle modern crises, you only have to look at the housing market. The sources dedicate a significant portion to the deeply broken housing system in the UK.
Yes, this section was eye-opening. You have Andy Burnham, who is positioned in the sources as a major political force and likely future prime minister, promising to solve the crisis by launching the biggest council house building program since the post-war period.
That's the traditional approach.
The old school logic.
Yeah.
If there aren't enough homes, the government should just build and own more homes.
But The Economist's data fundamentally dismantles that logic. They point out a surprising fact. England already possesses more social housing than any other G7 country.
Really?
Yes. Fully 16% of their entire housing stock is social housing.
So if they have so much housing, why is there a crisis?
Because the rulebook governing who gets that housing is broken. When you are allocated a council home in the UK, you receive a massively discounted rent. But crucially, that discount is guaranteed for life, and there is absolutely no ongoing means testing.
Let's unpack that mechanism. What does a lack of means testing actually look like in practice?
It means that if your income triples, 10 years after you get the house, your rent stays exactly the same. The sources calculate this creates a £20 billion a year implicit subsidy.
20 billion.
Yes. As a result, you have absurd systemic failures. More than 10% of the households living in subsidized social housing are actually in the top 40% of national earners.
I read this crazy anecdote in the sources. Is it true that the wife of the president of Sierra Leone was found living in a council home in London?
It is true, and it perfectly illustrates the dysfunction. While high earners hold on to deeply subsidized city center properties, over 1 million low-income households who actually rely on state benefits are forced to navigate the brutal private rental market.
Paying extortionate rates.
Exactly, all because the council homes are occupied by people who could afford market rent.
It also completely freezes mobility, right? If you're a pensioner living in a 4-bedroom council house in London, you're never going to move to a smaller place in the country because you'd lose your lifetime cheap rent.
You're incentivized to stay put.
Which means young families who need to live near the city for work are locked out.
Precisely. The system actively punishes the people it was designed to help. So, The Economist proposes a radical rewrite of the rules. They argue the government should charge market rents for all social housing across the board.
Which sounds incredibly harsh at first glance.
It does, but the second half of the proposal is the key. Take the tens of billions of pounds generated by those market rents and use it to fund highly targeted, dynamic cash benefits directly to the people who are actually struggling right when they need it.
It's shifting the subsidy away from the physical bricks and mortar and giving it directly to the human being.
Exactly.
But politically, proposing to take away a lifetime discount from millions of voters seems like political suicide.
Which is why the old rules persist long after they stop making sense. People cling to the binary structures they know. But as we move from economics into medical science, our sources show that clinging to outdated binary models isn't just bad policy, it is actively blinding us to the reality of our own physical bodies.
We have to talk about what's happening with human health, starting with what might be the most hopeful yet counterintuitive story in our entire deep dive. Let's talk about the dementia miracle.
This centers on the work of Eric Stallard, an actuary and academic. For decades, the narrative drilled into us by the media and public health officials is the impending dementia time bomb.
We hear it all the time.
We are told that as global populations age, we face an uncontrollable apocalyptic wave of cognitive decline. Current models project 153 million global cases by the year 2050.
But Stallard actually looked at the raw incidence data among elderly Americans, and what he found was so radically different from the narrative that he literally held off publishing his paper for 2.5 years just to continuously double-check his math. What did he find?
He found that if you adjust for age, the rate of dementia is in freefall.
Freefall?
Yes. 40 years ago, if you looked at Americans aged 85 to 89, 30% of them had dementia. By 2024, that number had plummeted to just 10%.
That's a huge drop.
And this isn't an isolated American phenomenon. Across 6 different countries in North America and Europe, the incidence rates have been falling by roughly 13% every single decade.
That is a staggering decline. How did we get it so wrong? Why are the global projections of 153 million cases still being pushed?
Because those massive projections rely on outdated models that only account for the fact that there will be more old people, completely ignoring the fact that the actual risk of a given 80-year-old developing dementia has fundamentally changed.
The actual likelihood is lower.
The medical paradigm is shifting. For centuries, dementia was viewed as an inevitable act of God, a dark lottery that struck the elderly randomly. We're now learning it is a highly preventable process, rooted deeply in midlife choices and systemic public health.
Let's dig into the mechanics of that prevention. The sources reference a major Lancet Commission report that identified 14 modifiable risk factors for dementia.
They did. And while some of the factors are exactly what you would expect, obesity, physical inactivity, high LDL cholesterol, the most impactful ones are surprising.
Like what?
The massive drivers of cognitive decline are a lack of education in early life and, crucially, untreated hearing loss and untreated vision loss in midlife.
Why hearing loss? I'm trying to understand the physiological connection between my ears deteriorating in my 50s and my brain deteriorating in my 80s.
Think of your brain as an incredibly complex, constantly active neural network. It requires a massive, continuous stream of sensory data to maintain its architecture.
Okay, that makes sense.
When you begin to lose your hearing or your vision, you are slowly starving the brain of that vital input. In response to the silence, the brain actually begins to prune those unused neural pathways. It atrophies.
Wow, it literally shrinks.
Yes. By simply prescribing hearing aids, you keep the network stimulated and actively delay cognitive decline.
That is fascinating. It proves the brain's plasticity well into old age. And there's actual clinical proof of this, right? The sources highlight the finger study out of Finland.
Yes, the Finnish geriatric intervention study. It was a massive randomized controlled trial that proved beyond a doubt that aggressive lifestyle interventions, specifically diet, exercise, and cognitive training, actively postpone cognitive decline.
But the detail that blew my mind is that it worked even for people carrying the ApoE4 gene. Can you explain what that gene is and why that finding is so revolutionary?
The ApoE4 gene is a specific genetic variant involved in lipid metabolism in the brain. For a long time, it has been known as the strongest genetic risk factor for late-onset Alzheimer's disease.
It was seen as inevitable.
If you tested positive for ApoE4, it is largely viewed as a biological death sentence for your memory. But the finger study proved that even if you carry that heavy genetic predisposition, lifting weights and changing your diet can still protect your cognition. Biology is not destiny.
The sources paint this vivid picture of 77-year-old women in a gym in Helsinki, aggressively lifting kettlebells as part of the trial, literally fighting off dementia with iron.
It's an incredible image.
But beyond lifestyle changes, there's a data point in this research regarding vaccines that we have to unpack, because it sounds like science fiction.
You're referring to the natural experiment that occurred in Wales regarding the shingles vaccine.
Yes. Explain how this experiment happened and what they discovered.
In 2013, the health authorities in Wales rolled out a policy offering a free shingles vaccine, but only to people aged exactly 70 to 79.
A very strict age bracket.
If you were 69 or 80, you didn't qualify. This inadvertently created a perfect, massive control group for researchers to study years later. They compared the medical records of the people who just barely made the age cutoff and got the shot versus those who just missed it.
And the results?
They found that receiving the new recombinant shingles vaccine, known as Shingrix, reduced the recipient's long-term risk of developing dementia by an astonishing 20% for at least the next 7 years.
Okay, stop right there. Why on earth would a vaccine designed to prevent a painful skin rash have any impact whatsoever on a neurodegenerative brain disease? What's the mechanism?
Medical science is still racing to fully understand it, but there are two leading theories. The first relates directly to the virus itself. Shingles is caused by the varicella zoster virus, the exact same virus that causes chickenpox.
Right.
Once you get chickenpox as a kid, that virus doesn't leave. It lies dormant deep inside your nervous system for decades. The theory is that as we age, this dormant virus causes microscopic chronic inflammation in the nervous system, which acts as a catalyst for dementia.
Oh, I see.
By neutralizing the virus with Shingrix, you shut off the inflammatory drip.
Wow. And the second theory?
The second theory is broader. It suggests that the vaccine acts as a massive, generalized stimulus to the aging immune system. It gives your immune cells a profound kick in the pants, waking them up so that they not only clear out the shingles virus, but also begin actively clearing out other low-level infections, or perhaps even the misfolded amyloid proteins in the brain that characterize Alzheimer's.
Okay, if the data is showing a 20% reduction, I have a very serious policy question.
Sure.
The global cost of dementia care is projected to run into the trillions of dollars over the next few decades. It will bankrupt families and states. A full course of the Shingrix vaccine costs, what, a few $100s at a pharmacy?
Roughly, yes.
If a $400 jab can cut the risk of a trillion-dollar epidemic by a fifth, why are governments rationing it? Shouldn't every health service on Earth be immediately mandating this shot for every 50-year-old?
Logically and mathematically, yes. It is one of the most asymmetric bets in public health. But bureaucracies are inherently short-sighted. They operate on annual budgets.
They only look at this year's spreadsheet.
Exactly. Persuading a health minister to spend billions of dollars today on a preventative measure for a disease that won't show up in the statistics for another 20 years is incredibly difficult. It requires long-term risk modeling that most political systems are simply incapable of executing.
We are trapped by the rules of the budget cycle, and we are trapped by outdated medical definitions. Which brings us to the other major health debate dominating the July 2026 reporting: obesity.
This centers on a brilliant essay by Francesco Rubino, a leading bariatric surgeon. He points out a glaring contradiction in modern medicine.
What's the contradiction?
We now possess these miraculous GLP-1 drugs, like Wegovy, which are now available in pill form and can safely strip away a fifth of a patient's body weight. We have the cure, but the medical community fundamentally lacks a consensus on what the disease actually is.
I read that and was genuinely confused. How can medical science not know what obesity is? We have the body mass index. We have charts in every doctor's office in the world.
And that chart is exactly the problem. To understand why, you have to look at the history of the BMI. It was invented in the 19th century by a Belgian astronomer named Adolphe Quetelet.
Wait, an astronomer.
Yes, an astronomer. It was never intended as a diagnostic tool for individual human health. It was a statistical tool meant to measure the averages of large populations.
For like census data.
Exactly. But in the 20th century, the life insurance industry discovered the BMI. They hijacked it to create actuarial tables to determine who was statistically more likely to die early so they could adjust their premiums.
So an insurance tool became a medical rule book.
Exactly. Because of that, for decades, obesity was defined by doctors merely as a risk state. It wasn't treated as a disease in its own right.
Meaning if you were severely overweight and it was destroying your knees and putting massive strain on your heart, a doctor wouldn't prescribe treatment for the weight itself unless you also developed a recognized comorbidity like type 2 diabetes.
Correct. No diabetes, no therapy. It was a cruel paradox. In response to this, there has been a massive modern push by advocates to reclassify all obesity as a chronic, progressive disease. But Rubino steps in here and argues that this is a dangerous overcorrection.
Why is it dangerous to call it a disease? Doesn't that get people the treatment they need?
Because biology is a spectrum, not a binary. If you label all obesity, defined simply by a high BMI, as a disease, you are instantly marking millions of people as sick who may actually be perfectly healthy.
Healthy despite the high BMI.
Yes, there are people with high BMIs who have perfectly preserved organ function, normal blood pressure, and excellent metabolic health.
And from an economic standpoint, if a government officially declares all high BMI as a disease, their national health system is legally obligated to treat it. They will bankrupt themselves trying to fund expensive GLP-1 drugs for a third of the population who might not actually need medical intervention.
Exactly. Precision in language dictates precision in treatment. This is why Rubino proposes a new diagnostic framework. He argues we must separate clinical obesity, where excess adipose tissue is actively causing demonstrable dysfunction to the organs, from preclinical obesity, which is merely a risk state that requires monitoring, but not necessarily lifelong pharmaceutical intervention.
He uses a great analogy for this in the text.
Yes, he compares it to cancer screenings. You don't prescribe aggressive chemotherapy the moment you find a benign polyp just because it might become cancer.
Right, that would be malpractice.
You shouldn't prescribe lifelong metabolic drugs for a risk state that hasn't actually caused biological dysfunction. It's about abandoning the binary sick or healthy chart and treating the actual human being in front of you.
As a slightly lighter note on how rigid these physical rulebooks can be, the sources included a letter to the editor from a very tall man.
Oh, I love that letter.
He was writing in to complain about the daily indignities of being outside the statistical average, having his knees crushed in airplane seats or having to get on his hands and knees in department stores because the extra large clothes are always stuffed on the bottom shelf. It's a humorous letter, but it serves as a perfect, tangible metaphor for our entire discussion. The physical world, just like our institutions and our medical charts, is built for a statistical average. Anytime you fall outside that binary norm, the system doesn't accommodate you. It punishes you.
Which brings us to the final, and undoubtedly the darkest, topic in our deep dive today. We've talked about how the aging brain can be protected, and how our physical bodies defy simple categorization. But how does society judge the brains of the very young when they commit unthinkable acts?
We are talking about the age of criminal responsibility, grounded in the ancient legal doctrine of doli in capax.
Which translates to incapable of evil.
Exactly. It's the legal presumption that a child, below a certain age, fundamentally lacks the cognitive and moral development to fully grasp the consequences of their actions.
Therefore, society agrees they cannot be held criminally liable in the same way an adult would be.
The sources frame this debate around a truly chilling story out of Gothenburg, Sweden. Can you walk us through what happened?
It is a stark example of modern exploitation. A 13-year-old boy is recruited via the encrypted messaging app Signal by an anonymous user going by the handle Acon.
Just a random internet recruiter.
The boy is offered 200,000 Swedish krona, roughly 19,000 US dollars, to carry out a hit. At 7 a.m. on the day of the attack, the recruiter sends a YouTube tutorial directly to the boy's phone, showing him exactly how to load a specific handgun.
The tutorial.
Shortly after, the 13-year-old walks right past a parked police car in broad daylight and opens fire on the entrance of Elbit Systems, an Israeli defense contractor.
Just brazen violence, and he was caught, right?
He was arrested almost instantly, but because he was 13 years old, he was below Sweden's minimum age of criminal responsibility, which is 15.
So what happened?
Under the law, he was completely immune from being charged with a crime. And the tragic reality is that this immunity is precisely why he was recruited to pull the trigger.
The gangs are weaponizing the rulebook, and reading the sources, this isn't just a Swedish problem. This tactic is causing massive political whiplash globally. Politicians are reacting to the visceral terror of their voting base.
We want to look tough.
Sweden is now aggressively pushing to lower the age of responsibility from 15 to 14. Argentina just dropped it to 14. And in Queensland, Australia, they went even further, passing a law literally branded adult crime, adult time, which allows judges to hand down life sentences to children as young as 10 years old.
The tactical shift by organized crime is insidious and highly coordinated. Gangs, narco cartels, and terror networks are specifically hunting for young foot soldiers.
Because they're immune.
Because a 12-year-old is cheap, they have wildly underdeveloped impulse control, making them fearless, and most importantly, they serve as a legal shield for the adults running the syndicate. And they aren't recruiting in dark alleys anymore. They are recruiting openly on Instagram and TikTok.
The quote from one of the gang recruiters in the sources is haunting. He said, "You arrest one kid, I can jump on Instagram and recruit hundreds more in a second."
It's terrifying.
But I want to push you on this because it's a profound moral dilemma. It's very easy for us to sit here in a studio and cite neurodevelopmental science. We know biologically that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function and risk assessment, isn't fully formed until the mid-20s. We know they literally lack adult judgment.
The science is clear on that.
But how do you explain that to a terrified community? If you live in a neighborhood where a 12-year-old stabs their mother 26 times, or a 15-year-old assassinates a politician in Colombia, how do you look those victims in the eye and say, well, we have to have empathy for the developing brain? Empathy is an incredibly tough sell against pure, visceral public terror.
It is arguably the toughest sell in all of public policy. The emotional desire for retribution when a community is violated is profound, natural, and entirely human.
Right, you want justice.
But if we put emotion aside and look strictly at the data, the tragedy of these tough-on-crime policies is that lowering the age of responsibility doesn't actually satisfy the goal of making the public safer. In fact, the data proves it achieves the exact opposite.
Walk me through that data. How does locking up violent offenders make us less safe?
Let's look at Denmark. In 2010, facing a surge in youth gang violence, politicians reacted to public pressure and lowered the age of responsibility from 15 to 14. They wanted to send a message.
And what actually happened?
Youth crime went up because of the environment you place them in. When you take a 13-year-old whose brain is still incredibly plastic and highly susceptible to peer influence, and you lock them in a penal environment, you strip away any remaining pro-social influences. Teachers, family, community.
You just put them with other criminals.
You replace their network entirely with hardened criminal mentors. You aren't punishing them. You are providing them with a state-sponsored masterclass in criminality. Denmark saw the data, realized they had made a terrible mistake, and reversed the law just 2 years later.
What about Queensland with their adult crime, adult time laws for 10-year-olds?
The statistics out of Queensland are devastating. 96% of children released from their youth prison system reoffend within a single year.
96%. That isn't a justice system. That is a highly efficient manufacturing plant for creating career criminals.
Exactly.
Sure.
And furthermore, lowering the age doesn't solve the root problem of gang exploitation. It's a race to the bottom. If lawmakers lower the age to 14 to deter gangs, the gangs simply adjust their algorithm and recruit 13-year-olds.
They just go younger.
If you lower it to 10, as they have in England and Wales, the cartels will recruit 7- and 8-year-olds. You can never out-legislate the ruthlessness of organized crime.
Listening to this, it really forces a shift in perspective. If a 40-year-old cartel boss uses an encrypted app to program a 12-year-old to pull a trigger, are we prosecuting the weapon instead of the wielder? In the eyes of the law, shouldn't that child be viewed as a victim of extreme human trafficking and exploitation rather than an autonomous criminal mastermind?
That is the essential paradigm shift the sources advocate for. The legal focus must shift toward enacting severe, draconian penalties for the adults doing the recruiting and the exploiting.
And for the kids.
As for the children, they must be removed from the streets for public safety, yes, but placed into secure therapeutic rehabilitation, not punitive prisons. You had to tackle the educational and social vacuums that made that 13-year-old vulnerable to a $19,000 pitch on Instagram in the first place.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today, pulling threads from all over the globe. Let's bring this all together. We started by looking at the fracturing of global alliances. Mark Rutte using calculated flattery to keep the rigid structure of NATO glued together, while middle powers like Finland and Canada abandoned the old multilateral boardroom for the agile group chats of plurilateralism.
And from there, we examined the And finally, we ended in the darkest corners of criminal justice, grappling with how an outdated binary legal system fails to protect society from the modern exploitation of child brains by organized crime.
So, as our expert guide through all of this complexity, what is the through line? When you look at a 13-year-old shooter in Sweden, a Russian billionaire in the Kremlin, and a red card at the World Cup, what is the final takeaway for the listener trying to make sense of all this?
Well, if there is one cohesive pattern vibrating beneath all these stories, it is that humanity is being forcefully dragged away from the comfort of binary one-size-fits-all rules. For decades, we loved binaries. Healthy or sick, multilateral or chaos, adult or child.
It makes the world simpler.
But the world no longer operates on those simple switches. It operates on spectrums. Defining obesity is a clinical spectrum. International diplomacy is a spectrum of ad hoc coalitions. The nations, the institutions, and the individuals who will actually thrive in the next decade will not be the ones rigidly clutching the old rulebooks and demanding the world conform. It will be the ones who possess the agility to navigate the gray areas.
The agility to navigate the gray areas, that is a profound lens through which to view the world right now. Thank you for walking us through this incredible stack of research. And to you listening, as you watch the news unfold this week, don't just look for the rules that are breaking. Look for the new patterns forming in the gray. We'll see you on the next deep dive.